share with us what your thoughts are with what's happening in the country at the moment and this demonstration.
I can't really help with the demonstration because since I saw you at Speaker's Corner, I've been sitting down by the embankment having a sandwich and a beer. So I'm a bit weak when it comes to demonstrations. I take the underground. What's happening in the country is yeah, I don't know where to fall on this because obviously around the world we're seeing moves towards, you could even call it fascism, obviously in Austria and Germany, New Zealand. Are the global powers that be trying things out in various places, and they see Britain as probably being a harder nut to crack. Um, but there are great dangers. I think honestly there are great dangers. The fact that with the world situation as it is, we could only get 2,000 people on a march that really ought to be of such significance that you'd expect 1 million people if they really knew what was going on to be occupying the streets every weekend.
Why don't people know what's really going on?
Really, because you guys are not watched enough. But it's all there if you, despite the efforts of YouTube and so on to censor things, which they do. There's enough out there to become important. I've been following this since it began, looking at official statistics. I used to work in the NHS in information, so I kind of know where to look. So quite early on, I was seeing anomalous discrepancies and things that really didn't ring true. The overcounting of COVID deaths, for example, the way the PCR tests don't work. So once you start, joining the dots, you carry on joining the dots, and you ask questions like, why is it that the Gates Foundation is giving so much money to media outlets? You cannot believe anything the BBC says. There was a report from their conspiracy theorist correspondent Marion Spring last week. It's on the BBC website. It's farcical. It really is. It really is almost like a. Here's what Mr. Gates has said. That's right. When you realise that the BBC takes money from the Gates Foundation, it all slots into place. Why? Yeah, it's an interesting point. I've had many discussions with people who are perhaps rudely called normies, but the people who don't spend a lot of time doing their own research, and they accept what comes out to them in the media, and of course I think a lot of people's perception was influenced early on by the scenes we saw from China. Now I've been reviewing that, and when you look at those images of people keeling over in the street, they're absurd, and yet it drove a fear into people. There was a combination of that. There was a situation in Lombardy, which is an area which has high atmospheric pollution, all sorts of other factors, but the hospitals were overrun. And then Mr. Ferguson's famous March 2020 paper that predicted enormous, 500,000 people dying or something like that. Those things sort of gelled in people's head, and they haven't been scraped away. People are still referring to Ferguson as if he's credible. He isn't. Again, that's my area of expertise. Once they released the computer code that was behind the modelling, I had a look at it. It's ridiculous. It is amateurish. It really is hobbyists throwing together this 15,000 lines of undocumented code that doesn't work. It doesn't even produce the same results if you run it twice with the same data. That kind of not working. So, again, that's another data point in the whole assemblage of things that you join together. So where was I with that? So why? Well, obviously, ordinary people, they're not necessarily, they don't know how to look at computer code and understand it. They don't necessarily. I think generally most people are swayed by images. They are swayed by these messages. There's another data point. I don't know if you're aware, which is the SPIB, that's a subgroup of the SAGE Committee, Behavioural Insights Group. It's all there online. I mean, this is the thing. None of it's a secret. Their March the 22nd minutes of that meeting or paper that they presented to SAGE talks about how to manipulate public perceptions using fear. Doesn't actually use the word fear, but reading between the lines, that's what they're saying. Now, again, once you once you've got that in your head, and you look at all the propagandizing, I mean, one of the last big campaigns they did was "Look into his eyes," and you pile all that up, and yeah, to an ordinary person, this is horrible, and perhaps people tend to think in times of crisis and fear, they want to see people in authority looking out for them. You want to trust somebody, don't you? And I think in a lot of people there is a big resistance to seeing through that and actually seeing, well, maybe these people in power are actually manipulating you. Maybe they have agendas that they are not talking about to you.
So what's the solution to all this? How do we get the country back?
Well, I don't know. I think my hope is that what's happening now as the vaccination rates go up, there's more and more coming out about the failures of the vaccines. You can't even call it a vaccine. It's a gene therapy that helps some people, in difficult situations. People who perhaps reduces deaths, but it doesn't reduce transmission. It fades after a few months. It's a therapy that messes around with your genetics. There's all sorts of bad. And again, I've been following this in some detail. There's quite a lot of studies coming out of credible people. For example, people like Norman Fenton at Queen Mary College, a risk management expert, looking at the data and really coming to conclusions that completely undercut the official message of safe and effective. Neither. When you look at for example, the yellow card statistics, that I don't know if your viewers know what that is, but it's an informal system of recording adverse effects from drugs, and compared with other drugs and vaccines that have been introduced in the last, say, 20 years, there's literally 10 times more than that accumulated bunch of adverse reports. So the COVID vaccines, if you draw a graph, it goes up, way to the sky in terms of the number of reports of deaths and adverse reactions. So just using that crude measure, there's clearly something going on, and it's a vaccine that had they been applying the regulations that applied to previous vaccines that had a lot of adverse reports, they would have withdrawn it months ago. I mean, but they're not, and there seems to be a general denial amongst a lot of the medical profession. I'm guessing the medical is probably split. There's an awful lot of people who do not want to put their heads above the parapet. You hear this all the time, anecdotal evidence that people who do put their heads above the parapet come on these marches and so on, and they tell of the horror that's going on inside organisations where if you speak out, that's the end of your career. So,
but what can we do to get it back?
Sorry, I went off on a tangent there. So what can we do? I think that keep drumming the message in, because I think what I was driving at was I think that there might come a tipping point. I'm hoping there's a tipping point soon where the effect or the experience of people actually doesn't match with what they're being told. So there's far more adverse reactions to vaccines that are being denied by the authorities, but people know about these. I mean, I don't know about you, but I personally know far more people who've had adverse vaccine reactions than who've suffered from COVID. Don't know anybody who's died from COVID. I've known a few people who had it and they had flu-like symptoms for a bit, but there's one mutual friend we have who's had a terrible reaction to the second jab.
But in terms of getting the country back, do we need people like you to enter politics? Because at the moment, or the people that have been elected are not really representing the people that elected them.
Yeah, this is a bit of a disappointment, really, isn't it? Because if you like, the opposition. Well, there's no opposition. I mean, the Labour Party has fallen into line with them. I'd encourage anybody who is aware of all this to write to their MP. You might say, so what? It doesn't have any effect. But I like to think it does. Because they don't get that many letters. So properly constructed personal letter pointing out evidence and so on. It may sway some of them. So the mainstream parties, there's very, very little opposition. You've got something like 50 to 80 Conservative MPs who've stood out against this, but certainly not enough. And there doesn't seem to be a figure who the opposition can coalesce around. I mean, you've got figures like Neil Oliver, for example, who's massively eloquent, and he'll be superb if he went into politics, but I don't suppose he's going to. But for ordinary people on the ground, like I say, it's talking to friends, relatives, write to MPs, blogs, whatever you can do, and keep challenging the thing at our levels. I've no intention of going into politics. I mean, that's probably...
I think you would make a great addition. You'd be better than what they're doing in there.
That's a very low bar.
But thank you very much for talking to us.
Talking to you, Manny. Yep.
We'll speak to you soon. Hopefully see you towards the end or during, again, in the demonstration.
Yeah, I'll be around for a bit. Yeah, okay.
All right. Well, I knew he was an intelligent man. I didn't realize he was super intelligent. And there you go.